Hello and welcome to today's session. How to engage and inspire your stakeholders to work with you to fill vacancies faster, more cost effectively and with A-player candidates. My name is Matthew Goddard and I am the director at Rhembo Consultancy. We're a specialist recruitment agency. We recruit for fashion, beauty and luxury retail brands. And I specifically recruit for retail operations, some head office roles and senior vacancies too. And I'm joined today by Sian Smith, who is talent and resourcing manager at FitFlop. And Sian, I'll come on to you in a moment to introduce yourself. But first of all, just to give you a bit of an overview on us and what we do at Rhembo. So as mentioned before, we recruit for fashion, beauty and luxury brands across various specialist areas. And why are we doing this? So why do we host webinars? It's something that we've been doing on and off now for around a year. And for us, it's all around giving something back to the industry that we recruit for. When we speak to clients, we often find clients say to us is that they want agencies to do more than fill vacancies. They find it very difficult to differentiate recruiters. They're all sort of talking about the same things. They all say they're different, but it's actually, what do you do that is? And they wanted us to do more in terms of actually understanding the market, giving relevant information back to the market. And so we began to build up a few ideas about how we can actually do this. What can we do to be different and to stand out and to give our clients something a bit different than just calling up asking if they've got particular roles for us to kind of work on. So that's where we came up with our webinar series, and it's a monthly series where we address issues that the industry has. So we find out first by chatting to them, finding out what are the challenges, what are the pain points that both the hiring managers and the HR and resourcing teams have. So this particular event is aimed predominantly at HR and resourcing teams. And what we found when we went out to the market and kind of asked what your particular challenges are, it was discovered that actually engaging and inspiring some of your stakeholders to work with you and to understand the value that you can bring to the kind of table is often very challenging. So today I've brought onto the session Sian Smith, who is currently resourcing and talent manager for FitFlop, who is going to share some of her ideas and strategies to how she kind of works and how she inspires her teams to work with her. So Sian, over to you. If you can just start off by giving us a bit of a flavour of your background and to introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Hi everyone. So as Matthew said, my name's Sian. I currently work for FitFlop, which, if any of you aren't aware, is a global footwear brand. So I kind of fell into recruitment a few years ago, where I started agency side actually. I did 2 years working in health and fitness recruitment, and then I moved across in-house to Monsoon Accessorize. I did a year there and then decided to move across to FitFlop. So I've worked in very different environments, as I said, agency side, and then moving to quite a big corporate company, looking after high volume roles across retail stores, and now with FitFlop, it's a slightly smaller company, very much a kind of startup feel, very entrepreneurial, ever changing. There's lots going on. So we have offices here in London, Hong Kong, US, Germany, Vietnam and Luxembourg. So I recruit over the global company. We have an HR team of 5 of us. I focus purely on the recruitment side. And yes, they're obviously here today to kind of give a little bit of insight into how things work here and what kind of things I've done. And I hope that can be a little bit helpful for everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Sean. So the way we're going to structure the session is to really focus in on some key questions that, from speaking to the market, I've identified 5 questions really that I'm hoping can tackle some of the challenges that you guys have. So the first one is really around how a resourcing team can be respected as a trusted advisor rather than this transactional kind of relationship that a lot of businesses are really working to move away from, and how they can demonstrate the value and really get the buy-in from the stakeholders who they work with. So Sean, what are your thoughts on this first question?
Sure. Well, I think it's a really interesting one, and it can be quite challenging, as you say. I think a lot of people in the business, will tend to come to you when they have any vacancy and just say, right, here you go, HR will sort this out for us. So it's very much about getting into the kind of core business plans, I think is the number one thing. So first of all, finding out what the goals of the company are, where we're headed, where we need to go, and then really kind of sitting down with stakeholders and actually advising, how we can help all the departments to try and get there with, making sure that we're resourcing the right people. I think we have to remember that we're the industry experts here, so we know what's going on in the market. We need to share what we know. We need to really almost educate them, I think, on what we do. So it's not just about finding a CV or, putting an advert out there and seeing, well, actually, yeah, we'll get a few candidates from that. But it's actually talking them through a proactive approach, getting them thinking commercially, almost kind of challenging and pushing back, and saying, actually, this is what we need from you. We need to partner with you. Rather than us just working on our own. I think also something I've done is, when I'm speaking to stakeholders is, again, talking about that, those kind of KPIs, the data, bringing data with me and actually having those conversations, and saying, this is what's going on in the market, as I said, and this is how we can work together to add the value. So yeah, I think that's what we're doing. I think it's a learning curve for everyone, and it doesn't come easily. I think we really have to work hard as HR to raise our profile in the business.
Fantastic, that's great, Sean. And are there any tools that you use within your business to help you build that relationship with your stakeholders?
I'd say at FitFlop, not necessarily specific tools. I'd say, we do a lot of research. We look at different kind of market surveys. We'll take that information to the stakeholders. We'll look at a lot of kind of metrics. So in terms of, we work on an ATS, we'll look at any reporting that we can take along and kind of discuss with them. I think it's a lot more, it sounds quite cheesy, but it's a lot more about that personal touch and like getting in front of those key stakeholders and really, pushing back and saying, we need to talk about this, you need to understand how we can help you.
Fantastic, that's great. I think I get that completely. I think from an agency perspective, often my challenge again is getting the stakeholders that I work with to understand what we do and how we can be different, perhaps from other agencies, how we are, really interested in them and their business. One thing that I do in terms of a tool, and I'm not sure what your thoughts would be on this, Sean, for me, the key thing, it's that initial tool that we use. It's the job brief, and it's not a job spec or an emailed description. It's always something that we'll do either on a phone or in the face-to-face chat. We'll sit down and we'll ask questions. And what I think in terms of the value that we can demonstrate, it's not so much in the answers that we have, but in the questions that we ask, in terms of asking the right questions to open up the mind of the stakeholders to perhaps they might think they need something and there's a particular requirement that they've got, but by asking a few questions, you can get them to actually open the brief up and to consider avenues that they might not have thought about previously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really key. And also, as well as that, we'll often talk through the organizational charts for that particular area of the business. And, when somebody says, actually, I want to hire this person, well, actually, how does that affect our wider team? What does that mean for other people? So, as you said, really getting into that detail and talking actually about, yes, we've got this spec, these are the things we want from the person, but actually what do we want them to achieve, in their first 3 months, in their first 6 months? What business impact is that going to have? And obviously, I think something else that we talk about quite a lot with them is, if we make this hire, if this hire happens and it's the wrong hire for any reason, what impact is that going to have on the business? And then, on the flip side of that, if we make a great hire, what are we going to achieve? What is the ROI on this? And then trying to get them to really talk about that commercial side and for them to understand that we understand that as well. And we're looking, for that same thing really helps.
Fantastic. And within your business now, who has ownership for the recruitment? Is it very much it's owned by the line manager, it's owned by the resourcing teams, or is it very much a collaborative approach?
I think when I first started, and in other companies I've been in, traditionally it's always kind of on us as HR on recruitment. But again, I think it's working together with the stakeholders. And now, where we've kind of come from in the last year is actually really positive, and we're really partnering a lot more. So it's about before I'm even putting a role through any type of approval process. As soon as anything's mentioned, it's about sitting down and having that initial conversation.
Great stuff. Brilliant, Sean. Okay, so move on to the next question now. So I think probably similar to the last one in terms of that relationship side. What I tend to find is that, some of my clients, you try to have a job brief with an area manager or a regional manager or a line manager, the head of, and very much they'll say, HR look after that, you need to speak to them. It's a culture in some businesses whereby, recruitment is something that the line managers do at the interview stage, and that's it, and everything else is down to HR resourcing teams. And I've noticed now a lot of businesses really are trying to engage the hiring managers at the beginning of the process more. So in terms of taking ownership, going back to that, is there anything else that you would do to really inspire perhaps some stakeholders who are perhaps a little resistant, how you would inspire them to really take ownership at the start of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I mentioned this previously, but first and foremost, it's looking at what exactly we need, how we're going to get there, what the ROI is going to be, and then it is that initial briefing conversation. What I'll also do a lot of the time is before I even begin to talk about how I'm going to source this person, I will ask them a few questions around where they think this person is going to come from. Where is this person now? What networks are they using? What groups are they joining? What backgrounds are they from? And we'll obviously start by advertising on our careers site, but I'll also make sure that the hiring manager is reaching into their network as well, whether that be posting something on LinkedIn, looking at their own groups, sending it around to their teams. So I'll really push back and make sure that they do that before I even start to be out there in the market speaking to people. Again, when I first kind of started, they'll ask me to write the specs and they'll ask me to do everything. But again, it's just about an education piece and pushing back on them. This is their hire. This is not my hire, it's theirs. It's going to be somebody that they're going to be looking after in their team. And they really need to own that. So we'll sit down and we'll make a plan together. As I said, we'll talk about where they see the person coming from and what channels we should be using. They're the industry experts, so I will take advice from them. And I think it's really great because most of them feel a lot more empowered by that. That actually, when you get them and you have their time and you start asking them questions, they enjoy it. They feel like they're part of the process. They actually feel like they're controlling the process, even though as HR we probably are. But they're empowered on that side of things. Again, I'll relate it back to their departmental goals. What do they need from this person? What is that going to mean for the team? So it's really about collaborating, and it's not something that can happen straight away. As I said, when I first came in here, the hiring managers didn't know me. They probably didn't trust me. They didn't know, where I came from. So it's very much about gaining that trust with them, and communication as well, I think, throughout the process. So from, the very early stages, it's keeping them updated with things and actually asking them those questions. Have you had any direct interest? Have you had anybody approach you? Have you had anybody that you've worked with previously who'd be interested? So it's just about that constant two-way, kind of partnership.
Good, fantastic. That's great, Sean. I agree with everything you've said there. Really. Again, I think what I tend to find is if you really do come of it, I think make them understand how everything is going to kind of benefit them is the key, isn't it? Really getting them to understand, to sort of talk at it from their level, really, from their perspective, bring it back to business and how it's going to affect their team. It's great. Again, are there any particular tools or any processes that you've implemented that has made your life easier in terms of inspiring your stakeholders in this particular process and getting their kind of buy-in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they need to be engaged, from very early stages, even from the approval stage. So as soon as they come to me and say, actually, I need to recruit for this role, we'll sit down and we'll talk about it. I will have a kind of informal form, where I'll have questions for them. We'll do a briefing meeting, but then they actually have to physically go and upload this role onto the ATS to send it through to approval. And in that process, they actually have to write in a case for this, not just financial, but any other things that it's going to add to their team. They've really got to explain it. And this approval process goes to the HR director, our CEO and our CFO. So they have to do that. And sometimes it's really interesting to see that when you ask them to do a process like this, and that's to actually, put down in this form the ROI and, what impact this person is going to make. If they're not completely sure, they will come back to you and they'll carry on talking about this with you, and then they might actually, I've had a couple of occasions where they've turned around and said, actually, do you know what, I'm not quite in that state in terms of our team to actually start the recruitment for this role now. I think I need to wait. So it really gets them thinking and places that ownership on them. In terms of another process, I mean, with job descriptions, no one ever wants to write one. So that's an interesting point for us. So again, I'll go to them and we'll sit down and we'll look at other JDs there on the market. We'll try and structure them slightly differently. I'll try and get them to think of, instead of those core skills, think a year in advance from here. What will they be doing? What does success look like for this person? because I think, your average candidate will look at a spec and they'll see these skills, but actually what they really want to know is what is, what can they do in this role? What impact can they make? And what does success look like, as I said, a year or two down the line.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so now looking at the candidate piece now. So this passive and sort of active candidate seems to be terms that we're very familiar in seeing now, and often it is argued that the best candidates are indeed those that are not actively on the job sites and actively looking for jobs. What strategies do you think retailers should employ to engage passive candidates?
Sure. Big question. Again, and
what sort
I
of things
think,
do you do to engage them?
Yeah, exactly. This is a real, kind of blue sky thinking, isn't it, really? That, as soon as you have something come up, you've got a giant pool of amazing candidates already engaged. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that, as we know. So there's a couple of things we do. I mean, first thing I think you need to think of, resourcing, recruitment is marketing. We need to look at talent through the lens of, a person in marketing, in brand, and we need to apply the marketing tools to our sourcing processes. So I think, we need to take into account what motivates passive candidates, what stage are they in, what are they looking for. It's probably not just about the financial side of things. It's, looking at our EVP. It's looking at what extra things we do, and what's the progression, what's the goal, what impact what impact can they have in this particular role. So, we'll do our best to try and engage with candidates as much as we can. LinkedIn is a huge tool for us, obviously without sounding like a LinkedIn salesperson. It's really, really key to our sourcing. We have our careers page, so we have followers around kind of 5,500 at the moment, and they're all, passive candidates. They're people that are interested, but not, potentially highly engaged yet, but they're there, they're seeing your content. So I think that's a really key thing to think about. What content are you putting out there, and what kind of people is it attracting? Something else we did, which was really interesting to try and engage with passive candidates, is we had quite a few roles potentially coming up in our product team at the end of last year. And we were really struggling with applications, finding great candidates. So we thought we'd hold an open evening. So it's not anything that we have held before. We basically shared the details of this internally, externally. We sent out email shots, all sorts of things. We ended up having just over 20 people there, and a lot of them weren't actually looking for a new role, but they were just really curious. And I think because we gave them this, kind of open evening to come along, find out a little bit more about us, but they didn't actually have to commit or kind of say, yes, I want in right now. It was just expressing, a little bit of interest, and, kind of, as I said, they were curious, and it was really interesting. From them, we actually built a really nice pool of candidates. We actually hired one person from the open evening, and we're still in contact with most of them. Quite a few of them actually email me every month or so, just kind of checking in to seeing what FitFlop are up to. Is there any updates in terms of roles, but also in terms of the product and press and, anything else out there. So that was something really interesting for us, which I think is something that we'll probably do in a couple of months or so again.
Good. And is that something that's very led by HR? And is there anything that you can get the hiring managers to do to engage with these passive job seekers, candidates?
Absolutely. I think it's just as much trying to get them to as well. I mean, that idea came from us as an HR team, but we did ensure that, they were spreading the word, with the people that they had in their groups. We really do encourage them to get online, to get blogging, to get speaking to people as much as they can. As I said, really kind of driving it home with their individual teams. We try and use our employees as much as possible because they're the ones that are here. They're the brand advocates. So it's trying to get them to post things, on their LinkedIn, on their Facebook, talking about us to other people. If they're going to events, kind of industry events, that's really key. I'll either try and say, yes, I'll come along with that too, or perhaps, you can talk to these people as you're there. So it's really just kind of spreading that word, using them as much as you can, and then once you've started to get those passive candidates and you've got that pool, even if you don't have something for them right now, it's about that long-term engagement, nurturing them, making sure that we're keeping in contact with them. It's a long game. I don't think it's something that, immediately you're going to have all these people that straight away, are interested, but it's just kind of keeping that flow and really kind of engaging them in the long term.
Good stuff. One thing one of my clients did that was successful for them, it was really to fill store and assistant management roles, or even more junior retail roles, really. And it was something that was very much led by the area and regionals, who were out in the field on a day in, day out basis. They sort of know the local areas. They wander around the high street. They know, what good stores are doing, where they might have had some great service. And it's really, they were going out into stores and just getting into conversations really with other people working in stores, and just discreetly having a conversation, perhaps sowing a seed for a position that might be coming up in the future. And actually this reduced their agency spend, which is not great, not kind of great for me, and but it's enabled them to fill vacancies that were live for ages, because they weren't getting a very good response from the job boards. Agencies were finding it hard to recruit people, a lot in these kind of remote towns whereby perhaps people don't go on the job boards quite so much as they do in the big flagship sort of markets. And that was a really successful way, and obviously a really cheap way of engaging the area managers to try and recruit themselves in the kind of local area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So yeah, the employer brand side of things. I think as the economy's picked up now, and clients are saying to me that it's a candidate-led market again. It's harder to actually recruit the right people the first time. The competitors are on the case. A good candidate often has 4 or 5 interviews going on at the same time. It becomes much harder to attract that A player candidate. So in terms of the employer brand, how can HR resourcing teams ensure that the employer brand is consistent across the entire business?
Sure. I think, first of all, again, it's going right back to the start with this. I think before you even begin communicating your employer brand, you need to really know and understand what it actually is. So things that we've done recently is we've surveyed our employees, we've set up focus groups, and we've asked people, we've said, be honest with us, be open. What do you think our culture is? What do you think our employer brand is? What do we live by? How do we act? How should we act? And that's in terms of looking at, people from senior down to entry level. So we've collated all that information, or we're in the process of collating it at the moment. And then what we're going to do with that is filter it all down and actually come up with some really key points that actually makes FitFlop. So when anybody says, what is FitFlop all about? It's consistent. Everybody is saying the same thing because we've come up with this concept ourselves. I mean, obviously, before this process, we did have an employer brand as such, but actually taking the company through this process is something that's enabled us, well, it is going to enable us to have that consistency. And I think sometimes the challenge of this in companies is getting the buy-in and the understanding from the senior team. It can be a real struggle, and something I always say, and I go back to again, is the whole recruitment piece. The employer brand is just as important as our consumer brand.
Absolutely.
Here, especially, we talk about the product, we talk about the consumer all the time. Everything is driven for that. But I think, how things are changing, the employer brand absolutely should be kind of, really top of everybody's minds as well as product brand. So I think what we've done as well is I've spent some time with marketing and the brand teams, and I've just explained this to them, and I've just talked through my points on actually we need to focus on this more. We need to look at our careers site. What is our brand saying to people out there? Our candidates are potentially our consumers as well. And by saying something as simple as that, it's almost a little bit scary for them, and they kind of realize, actually, yes, it's just as important. So that's something we've done recently, which is really exciting for us. And we hope as soon as we've got that kind of really nailed down, we're going to start talking about that a lot more in the business. But I think that the consistency part of that is really important. You don't want to mix anything up. You don't want to have confusion in the market. You don't want, somebody to come to your product site and then somebody to come to your career site, and you'd never know it looks completely different. So that's really key. It's interesting that this question comes up and you said consistent, because I think that's so important. If it's from an internal announcement to when you advertise something, it's all got to be the same. You have to see that and think, yes, that's our brand, that's FitFlop.
And are there any parts, or is there a particular part of the recruitment process where it is quite difficult to kind of convey that kind of consistent message?
Yeah, I think sometimes, we work really hard talking on the phone to candidates, doing that initial qualifying and screening, that initial interviewing. And then sometimes they can come in and you can be sitting in an interview and the hiring manager says something completely different. And that can kind of throw things a little bit. Or, maybe there's certain challenges in the business and they're kind of honing in on them, or they're explaining the culture slightly different to what you've said the culture is. So it can be challenging. Again, I think that's why we've decided to go and really talk about our employer brand more, because, yeah, you do need to get that consistency because it can confuse candidates, absolutely.
Good, that's great. I think the interview piece is really quite kind of interesting, because what I found in my career is that a lot of line managers have never really had any interview training. A lot of it is very off the cuff. It's kind of their own personality, and it comes from them. And sometimes I think there's a culture of people feeling the need to give people a bit of a grilling, and that can often have a negative impact on the employer brand.
Yeah.
If people are kind of treating candidates negatively, or they're giving them too much of a grilling within the interview situation.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you do with the line managers to ensure that you are giving a really positive experience at the interview stage?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we have interviews in, I'll make sure that I sit down with them and we'll talk through how we're going to structure the interview. We'll talk through exactly what we're going to ask, what we want to get from the interview, because I think a lot of hiring managers will come up with this massive long list of questions they want to ask, but then actually they haven't actually thought about what they want the answer to that question to be and what they want to get from asking that question. So I think it's really key to speak to them and to talk about, yeah, what do you actually want to get from that? I have put some interview templates in place because I find that some hiring managers really like to work from a very kind of structured template where they've got all their questions listed out. They know exactly each thing they're going to say. Some people love that. Some people hate it and prefer to kind of freestyle a little bit more. And that can be quite challenging for us in HR because for consistency, we need to make sure that every candidate's having the same experience, having a positive experience. And I'm sure we've all had the experience when we've been in there and the hiring managers have gone off on a tangent and, we're cringing and it's all a bit crazy. So that's something I have in place. So I make sure that I talk through that every time. And as I said, sometimes we use the template, sometimes we don't, but we tend to keep the interviews relatively similar in terms of that kind of core structure.
Great. Brilliant, Sean. I think moving on now to the last question. Really, I think from your personal views, any particular headaches? What are the most common things, the common frustrations that you've experienced in your recruitment career, and any particular things that you've implemented to combat those?
Yes, I'd say first one that comes to mind for me, and I'm sure a lot of others will identify it, is trying to get meaningful feedback from hiring managers on CVs or candidates after you've interviewed them. So many times I'll send over CVs or I'll speak to hiring managers and they'll say, yeah, they're not the right fit. I don't think they had the right experience. And sometimes I find it so difficult to actually drill down and get that detail from them. And for us as HR, it's so important because we're the ones that are feeding back. I'd never want to go to a candidate and not have enough constructive feedback to talk them through. Again, that links back to the candidate experience and the employer brand. So that's a real frustration. And in terms of, trying to combat that, again, it's pushing back and it's challenging and it's putting them in the position of a candidate and it's talking about employer brand. If we cannot give this candidate solid, constructive feedback, they're going to walk away from this process and, think that actually, no, that company isn't great. They're not very professional. I've taken the time out and they've not talked through any feedback with me. So that's a real bugbear of mine. And again, I think it's really about pushing back and making sure that you've got something to kind of talk through with the candidate. Another thing is CVs can get stuck in the process with hiring managers. So you can work really hard to get some fantastic candidates across, and then you send them across and you don't hear anything from the hiring manager. They don't come back. You push and you chase and you don't hear anything. So that can be really frustrating. And I think how I've tried to overcome that is going back to the briefing process again and actually almost putting a bit of an informal SLA in place to say, right, I'm going to get you CVs, or I'm going to work on sourcing and I'm going to have a short list to you by X date. Then, what I expect from you is for you to look at those and you to come back to me in X amount of time, again, linking back to the whole candidate experience. So not to be too formal and corporate, but just to have that kind of loose agreement in place that actually I'm doing this part for you, but you need to come back on this. And we need to keep the process moving through and keep these people engaged.
Fantastic, Sean. Both of those challenges, I think, are probably my two biggest frustrations, actually, too, in terms of the agency side. And I think they're great tips there that you've put in place to actually combat those. Because, yeah, I think when you're working either an agency or in-house, having to manage the relationships from both angles is really difficult, isn't it? Trying to keep everybody happy and moving the process along. So I think those kind of ideas are great. In terms of working with agencies, I know that you mentioned before that you do work with some. Any
Yeah.
particular frustrations, headaches that you've had working with agencies, and again, what you found to perhaps address those?
Yeah, I think there are a few, and I'm sure most kind of in-house teams will agree. I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's, all the agencies we work with, I really want that partnership with. So I don't just want a CV sent over. I want them to talk through, to tell me how they're sourcing, to really work together. A really big frustration is when an agency will just send over a CV with no notes, no information, and that's really frustrating because it's almost like they're not doing their job properly. You're paying them a fee, and they're not even having notes on this candidate. I think communication as well can be quite frustrating, and I think something that's really kind of key for me is just an agency that's going to be honest. If they
Yeah,
can't find candidates for your role, then just say, and actually maybe they can provide some advice and say, well, actually, I'm not sure you're looking and for the right salary level. I'm not sure this job title is quite right. I've worked with quite a few agencies who, we've engaged with them and they promised everything, and then you just don't hear anything from them. So I think, again, it's that kind of two-way process, really working together, and really making us as in-house teams feel that the agency has gone over and above. Ideally, we're engaging with the agency so they can reach candidates that we can't. So it's really going over and above and not just working with an agency that's just going to post an ad and hope to have some
hope for the
applications.
best.
All of
Absolutely.
us can, all of us can do that. So it's really trying to go over and, and kind of say that this is what else we can provide you. This is our partnership, and this is how we can help.
Great stuff. Thank you, Shah. Well, that actually brings us to the end of today's session. So thank you very much for your insight. It's been really valuable, and I'm sure the guys on the call have also found it really of interest. Sort of sharing the ideas, sharing how you work is really insightful. So thank you again for joining me. Any questions that anyone has, please drop me an email. Run over. I'm meant to finish about 5:30, so I'm quite keen to wrap the call up now. So any questions that anyone has, please drop me an email to the address there on screen, mattgoddard@rhembo.co.uk. Thanks again, Sean, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.